This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. The show brings you this step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are Capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotti, the Cap in Capitalize. And today in the studio, we have a very special guest. She really doesn't need an introduction, but what show would this be without an introduction? She is the soon-to-be four-time best-selling author and founder of the self-publishing services firm Book Launchers. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I caught myself because, again, we just got back from the Book Thinkers conference and Book Thinkers, Book Launchers. So if we have any confusion, just nip it right in the butt, and I will make sure to not mess that up. Now, before we dive into everything Julie, because we have a lot to talk about, I want you to first give our listeners just a bit more of a background on who you are, your company, and then after that, we're going to dive into the meat of this interview.
Okay. It's always fun when it goes background. It's like, how far do we go back? Once upon a time, I was a small girl on the side of Highway 1 in Canada.
Yes, absolutely. You could go that far back.
No, but I mean, the fun part of that was that my parents owned a 20-room motel, which I think sparked my entrepreneurial spirit because I got to see them working the motel every day, and I started working in it really young. But really, the background that's relevant to this conversation is that I started investing in real estate in 2001, and then eventually wrote my first book. And that book, in a roundabout way, I should say, led me to running Book Launchers, which is what I do today.
Yes, and say roundabout one more time.
Roundabout.
Yes. Oh my gosh, the Canadian accent is so great. Well, so what are the other words? So there's out, but then what other words? I think there's, because pasta, people say pasta.
Pasta, yeah.
Yeah.
Pasta.
So what are the other? So
process and progress.
Oh my gosh.
Those are the ones my son yells at me. Mom, speak American.
Speak American. That is awesome. I was going to say, we're going to have to get your son on here. So, okay. Yeah. And so if you just rip any of those, just go with it. Because I always love when people come on and they have accents. And it's funny because we actually had a guest a couple months ago, kind of going off script here, and he said, "You have an amazing accent." It was actually William Green, which was hilarious because he's got this beautiful British accent. I'm like, my accent, I think of it as like if a tub of mayonnaise was an accent, that's what I've got. So I don't know if I have an accent to you, but
no.
I appreciate the Canadian accent. So now that we have a bit of background on you and your company, I actually wanted to take a trip down memory lane to, I believe one of your first jobs was RealNet Canada. And so after doing some research on your time there, a lot makes sense in the world of Julie. But I'm curious, first, what got you in the door to RealNet? And then what were some of the best experiences you gained before you pursued your next chapter?
Yeah. So my first job was Kimberly-Clark Canada. Okay. But then I left them, did my MBA, and when I graduated, I did my MBA in real estate and finance. And when I graduated, I had met the founder of RealNet through my MBA, kind of part of the Schulich School of Business in Toronto, and he had an entrepreneurial spirit. It was a small company, 14. I think when I started, I was employee 14, and it was real estate data. So he'd created this whole database that helped developers and real estate companies, just understand the market. And so I joined there, and I held pretty much every role at the company, and was basically his number two when I eventually left the company and started started two of my own companies at the time.
Yeah. Well, and when you got into real estate, that's kind of interesting. There's a ton that I could get into because you've been doing it for almost 22 years to the date. Okay?
Darn near, yeah.
Darn near. Okay, so happy almost anniversary. And it's safe to say that you could have just gone the real estate route. Like you don't have to do all of these other things. So I first wanted to ask what got you into real estate, but then what specific type of real estate did you initially focus on?
Yeah. So I read Rich Dad Poor Dad in 2001. And that book, I was just about to leave Kimberly-Clark to go back to school to do my MBA. And I was really focused on the six-figure income. Like that was my goal at the time. And I read the book and I realized, wait a minute, I've got this big plan ahead of me to work for somebody else. And I thought, I got to get my money working for me. Mm-hmm. And so it was just that moment. And I realized that it was easier to get, school loans than it was to finance real estate. So I took the money I had saved for school and I applied it to my first two properties as down payments.
Smart.
Got the financing and then just financed my whole MBA education because the student loans were easy.
Yeah.
And that was just how I started. And I started with houses because that was simple. It made sense. I still actually prefer houses. I've had a rocky road with commercial. Still on a rocky road with commercial real estate, honestly.
We're going to get into that in a second.
It's a journey. So I love houses. People always need somewhere to live. If you buy them in a good neighborhood, sometimes you don't make buckets every month, but over the long haul, it pays off. So I'm still a fan of houses. That's what I'll buy in Vegas when I start buying houses again in states now that I've got credit. I can buy houses again.
Yes.
That's where I'll go. I don't think I'll go commercial, at least not immediately.
Well, and I was going to ask, so because your experience has ranged all over the place, and I've always found it fascinating how many people think real estate is real estate. That's the farthest thing from the truth. So I'm curious, how are you approaching the commercial? Because I believe I read too, you also dabbled in specifically office space?
Yeah, I had medical. We had 30,000 square foot medical office building.
Okay, so how are you approaching that portion of your portfolio in this environment, or did you just get rid of it and it's gone?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of our rocky road. So we bought this property. We owned a whole bunch. This is all in Canada, but we owned a whole bunch of property in Nanaimo, and we were kind of buying up this one area for redevelopment. But as bad luck would have it, we had it was primarily a doctor's office, and then there was ancillary stuff around it, like a blood lab and chiropractic and a little drugstore. So all the tenants besides the doctor were kind of dependent on the doctors, and the doctors, they didn't do a midnight move. They gave us 60 days notice, but 60 days notice to fill 20,000 square feet, not so good.
Yeah.
And by the way, this was January 2020. So you try filling 20,000 square foot of office space in a pandemic. Mm-hmm. Doesn't work.
No.
Nobody wants anything. And so then the other ones left, and we ended up with an almost entirely vacant building that we were carrying for 11 months, which, mortgage, carrying costs, it was a nightmare. Mm-hmm. And we're down in the States, so we're not able to travel back to Canada because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was really not good. So we ended up having to sell several houses to fund the losses, and then we sold that property to a developer who is in progress of developing it now. So it's kind of a sad story.
That is sad. Absolutely. Ty, we're going to have to get some tissues in here. Well, and it's interesting because as I'm thinking about this, first off, your story, like, triple knots my gut. Like, that is just absolutely brutal. Second, it's one of those things that I was curious about. Was that the chink in the armor where you're like, okay, do I really want to keep doing this on the office side? Because commercial, you can do really well, or you can absolutely lose it.
Yeah, and I mean, I still would consider commercial, but the thing is, this is where I've had bad luck, is we have another, in the same area, we have a dental office, and we had arsonists light fire to it like 5 weeks ago. And now we're still waiting for insurance adjusters to finish their work so we can start working. And there's a clause in the lease that after 3 months of not being operational, they can break their lease. So, meanwhile, there hasn't been any work started. So I feel I feel a little like commercial and I are not meant to be.
Yeah.
And
Man, I'm really glad I'm bringing all of these
Right?
subjects up
Are
today.
you like, this is great. Everybody's going to be like, I'm never going commercial investing. I mean, the great part is when you get a good tenant in place, year after year, if they build their business around that, you've got great income. Like
Yes.
when that medical office building was doing well, man, it was doing well.
Yeah.
And it would have been great had it not been a pandemic. Even with the doctors moving out, there was in a gaming company that was interested in moving in. But, it was just bad timing. And then we weren't there to be able to kind of hustle up, tenants like we maybe would have. Although with the pandemic, there was zero interest. There wasn't even anybody inquiring. So,
Right. Hence the 11 months.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then even trying to get a developer, it was a whole journey. So, and our whole plan had been to develop the property because it's got ocean views. And yeah, it was a beautiful spot. So it's sad. I'm like, oh, it makes me sad to talk about it.
Well, and even as we're talking, right, even in like the lowest low, you can tell like you're in the presence of a Canadian where it's not the midnight walk, because that's what we call it down here when you absolutely bounce. It's the midnight move, which just sounds so much kinder than the midnight walk. Well, and so I want to go back a little bit. So back in 2008, during the Great Recession, you took the plunge from going from RealNet to entrepreneurship and you went all in. And as we're talking now, I realize, okay, that's 7 years in the real estate world. Obviously, you're very prudent. And so that ball started to roll. What was that process, that thought process like for you going from RealNet to the entrepreneurship? Was it calculated? Did you just have a tipping point? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I said, oh, I've got enough money to leave my job. For me, it was a moment in the company because, like I said, I was the number two. I think he was grooming me to take over the company for him. But the real moment was I had done all the planning. We'd presented our annual plan, or we're going to present our annual plan to the board. And so I presented it to him, and he said, and the next day he called me into the conference room, and he slid one piece of paper across the table after I'd done months of work preparing for this board meeting. And this was like, here's your 3 objectives, and there's the 5 ways you're going to achieve the objectives under there. And none of it was the stuff that I had worked on.
Oh, so he basically just told you, okay, these months have been great, but like this is what you're going to do.
This is what you're going to do. Like,
ouch.
And I just all of a sudden, and the part that really irked me, besides the fact that I'd done all this work, and it wasn't like a surprise to him. I'd been running the stuff by him. And I remember one of the things I really wanted to work on was building a blog. It was a data company. And I could see like Twitter and the blogs and like all this stuff was coming out.
Yeah.
And he was just like, I'll never forget. He goes, Julie, I feel like a blog when you're talking to me about this stuff. And I was like, oh, man. And so I felt so trapped. It sounds so funny today that somebody didn't understand blogging, but in 2008, he was terrified. But I'm like, this is a data company. Like a blog is going to kill it. And a newsletter. I was like, come on, let's start our own email newsletter. Like we'll be one of the first ones out there. You've got the best data in the country. And so when he slid that piece of paper across the table, I suddenly realized I had no control over anything. Like I was being told what I had to do and the 5 ways to achieve it. So if it failed, it was my fault. If it succeeded, it was probably going to be because I did what he told me. And so it was in that moment I quit. But I didn't like, oh, okay, that's it. I'm out. It took 3 months. I kind of lined up my ducks. But financially, it wasn't a good time. It was 2008. All my real estate was crap.
Yeah.
But you kind of just get those moments where you go, I can't do this anymore. And I'd rather bet on myself than bet on someone else.
Right.
And so I remember walking out and I called my husband and I just said, I'm quitting. Like, I'm not quitting today, but I'm quitting.
It's happening.
He was a broker, a real estate broker, mortgage broker.
Okay.
So, you know what his income was.
Yeah. And that's on a good day.
In 2008, 2009.
Yes.
It was stinky. So, I was the income earner, but he just kind of said, okay, well, we'll figure it out. And we did. We had to move back in with my mom and dad later in 2008, kind of early 2009, to feed the money that I was generating from the business back into our businesses so they could grow. But, I'm lucky enough that my parents took us in and were happy to do so, and we got things going from there.
Yeah. Now, I have to ask, how long did it take until you guys were just losing your minds living with your parents again?
I mean, it was extra because it was an island, like a Gulf island. So it wasn't even just Vancouver Island. It was on the Gulf Island. They were on Salt Spring Island, if anybody knows.
So you were trapped.
So we were trapped, and all our investing was on Nanaimo. So we had to take the ferry to get to Nanaimo. So whenever people talk about fairies, I kind of get hives. I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
they're pretty, but no.
Yeah.
So it was probably a year. I think we survived a year of it, but my parents are wonderful, wonderful people. I mean, gracious enough that we've moved back in with them twice now. So
Okay. Now, are you still living with them right now?
no, gosh, no.
Okay. Well, hey.
They're in Canada. I'm in Vegas.
Okay. Got it. So I have to ask, obviously, humor aside on the timing, 2008, what were the first couple years like for you as an author, speaker, and founder? And I believe was it revenue training?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was that like, the first couple of years of being free?
I remember, every day I just got up, got to work. I did some education in the morning, and every day I just kept telling myself the missing piece is action, and I just kept going. Because it was hard, especially trying to buy a property, raise money, because we couldn't necessarily get financing at that time. So we had to raise all the capital. So there was a lot of moments where I was like, what have I done? What have I done? But I also have I am that stereotypical entrepreneur where I'm just I can take the suffering. I can do it. I can power through. I can get things done. And I know when I set my mind to something, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not always on the timeline that I would like it to happen, but it will happen.
Would you say that you feel better when your back's against the wall in a weird way?
There's this funny thing, like when you get comfortable, it's a scary place. I find it a scarier place than discomfort because when I'm comfortable, I'm worried that I'm not going to grow. I'm not challenging myself anymore. So I live the unpleasant life of constantly seeking discomfort.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fun person to live with, probably.
Okay. Yeah, you're really selling yourself, right?
I know, right?
Started buying real estate in 2008. Had a commercial real estate property in 2020.
Yes. To be fair, to counter this, so
Yes.
I don't sound like I flopped.
Yes.
Buying property in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, by 2010, I was buying a house a month. And those properties, my friend.
Oh, yes. Yes. That is the definition of buying the dip.
Yeah, that was good.
Yes. And just like, if you were a total flop, you would not be here in the first place. So, yeah, the show would not be exploding.
I just tend to go where the mistakes are because, A, that's juicier than all the winnings. And also, that's where you learn. That's where the gold comes from because all the wins, they don't teach you anything. In fact, they probably make you think you're better than you are. But the losses, that's where the real gold is. That's where every time something has gone wrong in the moment. And that's why the commercial, even though it makes me sad, I feel like someday I'm going to look back and I'm going to go, man, that was a great gift. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the gift is in that one yet, but I can say that about everything else that at the time I thought was devastating. I'm like, man, that was a good gift. I got a really great lesson from that, and I'm so glad that happened.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotu, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah. Well, and it's no different whether it's real estate or privately owned businesses or stocks. I can tell you, even for my wife and our portfolio, you look at it's so easy to look at the winners and just marinate in the success. But like you said, it's the losers, and I say losers, quote unquote, for those of you that are just listening in and not watching. That's where, like you said, you make your bacon. Okay. And I love bacon. So I want to make some bacon. Now, for you, so when you started revenue training, because I was thinking about this. On one side, I'm like, okay, you've got this real estate, you've done well, not the best timing, but also I know you're prudent. After we got to connect at Book Thinkers conference, did you then seek in your husband any outside capital, or did the real estate essentially fund you starting your consulting firm, your first consulting firm?
No, I bootstrapped revenue because
Awesome.
I mean 2008, 2009, we were raising capital, but we didn't really start raising a ton of capital in 2010, and then by 2013 the capital tap was on nicely. But so yeah, we funded all of our investments with the vast majority we did with investors. But revenue, I bootstrapped. I built that thing from day one. I wrote an email newsletter and built my newsletter list and built a website. I learned HTML coding to build that website. I did all in the beginning. I did it all myself. I partnered with a U.S. company actually called Early to Rise, and they helped me sell my very first course. And back then it was like you shipped it. You had to arrange to have the CD, the workbook, everything produced, and you shipped it in a box. And so that was my first course that I sold, and I sold it with them as an affiliate partner.
It's kind of funny. So the last couple guests that we've had on, and even the guests that we had, Ty and I hosted right before you, Mark Green, the common theme I've heard, because I am not a tech guy at all. My brother can attest to that. He's probably rolling his eyes behind the screen. But as far as coding, the last 4 or 5 entrepreneurs we've interviewed, they've all gotten into it. And sometimes I'm like, man, I've really just missed the boat. Was that just super frustrating, or did you pick up on it pretty quick? I'm just curious.
I hated it. I'm not a detailed person. I'm not a detailed person, but I am the kind of person that's like, well, I got to get this done. So I figured it out and I did it. And yeah, it wasn't the prettiest website, but man, it worked.
Yeah. No, hey, as long as it works and it gets people to where they need to go, that's what happens. Well, so as I was digging into your career, I realized that, in theory, again, we got through 2008, 2009. You had some good purchases around that time. And unless you or anyone just royally screwed the pooch, you probably could have just coasted on a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
But you didn't. And so you went on and you created book launchers. Mm-hmm. So what made you decide to transition from the one business revenue training to book launchers? I mean, can you tell us what that story looked like?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was, doing real estate for so long with my husband. So both of the companies, he kind of oversaw the investment company, and revenue was mine. Mm-hmm. And but it was all real estate all day, every day. It was nonstop real estate. It was too much, and so we were doing really well. Like you said, we were kind of coasting, and he was getting bored, and so he started trying to do these bigger deals. That's kind of how we ended up in the commercial. He tried to do this apartment deal. It fell through. And after the second deal fell through, and you spend a lot. The other thing about commercial is when you're doing the due diligence, an inspection is $30,000, not $3,000.
Uh-huh.
It's substantially more. So having deals fall through gets more and more expensive at the commercial space. So it was after the second deal fell through, I was like, "What are you doing? We don't need to do this. We don't need to buy anymore right now." And he just was like, I was bored. I was like, "Well, what else do you want to do? Kind of get out of trouble, Anyway, then he's like, "Well, I always wanted to be an actor or a drummer or an actor." And I was like, "Well, I've heard you sing, so maybe let's try acting." And so he got back into acting, and he was starting to pursue a career there. And it was going okay, but I'm not a patient person. And so 3 or 4 years into it, all the good stuff was auditioning out of LA. Vancouver has a good economy for movies, but everything still auditions out of LA unless you're going to be like the waiter that says, "Can I take your order?"
Yeah.
And that kind of bit part, which is all he was getting. So I was like, we better go to LA. So I started spending time in LA to buy a business, because to get a visa to move down, I could have qualified for this thing called O1 because I'd written a couple of books and had some I was on media and had notable success. And so it was like the extraordinary person thing. Yeah. But he didn't qualify as an actor. He hadn't had enough big pieces. So we had to get an E2 visa, which would allow the spouse to do anything, and then the business owner would just run the business. And so I started looking at buying businesses, but everybody's business has problems. And I would look at these problems and I'd go, I don't like this problem. If I'm going to have problems to solve, I want them to be ones I created. I'd rather look at a problem and go, God, I was an idiot. Why did I do that?
Yeah.
Versus staring at somebody else's mess and trying to fix it. Mm-hmm. So then I dreamed up book launchers. I was like, well, what would I do? And I always loved books. I always thought I'd be a writer until somebody told me writers didn't make money. That's how I ended up in business school.
And how many books did you have? I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah,
how many books did you have out by this point?
I'd only written 2.
Okay.
And the second one did not do very well. I actually think the second one's my best book that I've ever written, but it wasn't positioned well because I was in this no man's land of we're leaving real estate because I'm not going to run 2 real estate businesses without my husband.
Right.
And he was not in it anymore mentally. So I had 2 books out. So part of the visa, though, required you hired people. Like in order to get this, it's the most backwards way to build a business is you basically have to spend a boatload of money, enough that the U.S. government deems you as serious, and you have to hire people immediately as part of this visa, and it's like all these criteria. So knowing that, I was like, well, I'm going to have to hire people right from the start. So it doesn't matter that I don't know how to do all this stuff. I'll just hire people who do.
Right.
And so that's what I did. My first 2 hires were somebody who had run a bunch of books through the whole process from start to finish, and somebody else who was a really talented writer and writing coach.
Interesting. I'm smiling too, because every once in a while I'm like, this is so captivating, and then you just drop that Canadian term, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna walk out of here, right? Just with the totally different pep in my step. So once you knew that you were gonna launch Book Launchers, is that a pun? I don't think that was. No, we'll say it was a pun. So what was your thought process? Oh my gosh, I almost said it. Thought process. Thought process.
Join me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna walk out of here just like in a hockey jersey. I'm like, where did this come from, right?
Yes.
So what was that process behind getting it off the ground? Like, because you this wasn't your first rodeo.
Yep.
And so what were the most valuable experiences that you took from revenue to help launch Book Launchers?
This is such a good question. So revenue I had to sell for parts, so which devastated me. So revenue, I sold the website and my YouTube channel to a company, and then I had courses and I licensed them off to, I think there was 4 different licensees. So I had 3-year licenses, and then after that the courses became theirs. But for 3 years I actually made revenue. Pun.
Yes, yeah, that was another one. Yeah,
from the course, and so that was kind of cool. Like that was a whole new experience too, licensing off courses and having supporting the licensees. But in that, like there was nobody that would want to buy the business as it was, because the business was essentially myself with a little bit of support.
And this is revenue.
Yeah, this is the revenue business.
Got it.
And so when I did that, there was a couple things. I didn't have a lot of recurring revenue, and there really wasn't a business. There wasn't much without me. So when I started looking at building a new business, I was like, I'm building something that can sell eventually. Like it's got to be something that has recurring revenue, that has more value than just me. There's like a robust process that can run without me. So I started this business very intentionally, not like building it to necessarily sell, but building it so it could be. And so that was from the very beginning. My model is very different. We were monthly service. So
Smart.
All of our authors are monthly clients, and some of them have been with us since I launched in 2017. So, it works. They, my team markets them and gets their book out there and builds their brand, helps them build their business around their book. And it's fun. I love it. But that was part of the process, was like, okay, how do I build something that doesn't have the same issues that my business had before? Mm-hmm. And the other thing that was a benefit was because like writing 2 books does not make me any sort of author expert. Even though my first book did really well, it doesn't matter. Like I'm not, even to this day, I feel like I'm not necessarily the expert, because there's so many nuances. Like I don't know the Chicago Manual of Style. I don't know how to edit a book. But it was great because I literally don't know how to do most people on my team's job. So, which is a benefit, because a lot of owners end up in the trenches, but I couldn't be in the trenches because I didn't know how to do it. Yeah. So I painted the vision and hired the people, and they execute, and I still continue to paint the vision.
Yeah. We know how that works, where, one party knows how to set all of this up, and then the other party comes in and it's like Ricky Bobby, I don't know what to do with my hands. So I totally get that. Now, for Book Launchers, how long did it take for this business to become profitable, but then also self-sustaining?
Yeah, I mean, it's had a journey. So it wasn't profitable for the first, year and a half. And that's partly because I had to build it backwards, right? Mm-hmm. Like I had to spend a lot of money, hire people before there was even clients. I wasn't allowed to generate revenue in the beginning because I didn't have a visa. Until the visa came through, I had to spend all the money and actually couldn't get clients because it's an American company and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so it was backwards. So it took about a year and a half. And then it grew.
It's still pretty quick, by the way. A year and a half's pretty quick.
When it's your money bleeding, it feels like forever.
Oh, no, I know that. Yeah, I get that. Sorry. And I didn't mean to interrupt, but keep going. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then it grew really fast, which was wonderful, really great. And then it started losing money. And it took me almost a year of losing money to figure out why I was losing money because we were growing. And what I learned was that we were over delivering because we're monthly. And so what happens is like our team kind of got this like, let's make every client like so delighted. And so they treated every book like a hot potato. It was like the minute it came in, they were turning it around, which meant instead of it taking 2 to 3 weeks to finish an edit, it was taking 6 days. But so we're monthly service. Somebody's paying us, $2,000. We'll just make easy numbers, $2,000. We just paid our editor, $2,100 sometimes for an edit, and we're only taking 6 days. So it took a while, though, to figure it out because it wasn't obvious what was happening. Because when I explain it this way, it sounds obvious. But at the time, it was like we're adding more clients, and we had the same number of team members. Like, why aren't we getting a profit? And so eventually we realized it kind of restructured how we were servicing things, kind of set some more parameters in. And then my work authorization expired and I had to stop working for 3 months.
Nice.
And my team, you say nice, but I was the main salesperson. So the one job I do is I bring new authors into our business. So we just got it turned around. We're like 7 weeks into profit finally after a year of losing money. And then the U.S. government says, no, you can't work for your company until we sort this out. And so I had to remove myself completely from the company, and my team did phenomenal. They serviced those existing clients like crazy. They also learned that they are not salespeople. They did not bring in a single new client while I was off. And so we were back in the not profitable.
Yeah.
But we're getting back there now. So it's all good. But it's a journey. It's always, I always smile at people who are like, I've seen everything. I'm like, really? Have you really seen everything?
Yeah. When you can tell the people that have seen, like, if someone says to me, oh my gosh, I've seen it all, you're thinking, no, you haven't. And it's the ones that just, you would think, wow, you should be really shocked at everything that just came across your plate. And they just look at you like, I'll just look in the camera, just like totally brain dead. There's nothing that can faze them. Like if the metaphoric or literal gun went to their head, they'd just go, okay. You just kind of go from there. But you're at this point in your career now where, let's face it, right? And we've kind of bashed like the low times, but you're doing great. You are doing fantastic. And I'm just kind of curious, what does a typical day even look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, these days it's a lot. I have a lot going on. We're really trying to extract myself so I don't have a lot going on because I have hired a salesperson, but I'm still talking to a lot of the authors that are interested in working with us. I have a YouTube channel. I do podcast interviews.
Yes, you do.
And I have a new book coming out. And so I'm doing all of the pre-launch stuff. And we're not even doing a huge launch for this particular one because this one's more of a tool that we're going to use to feed into some software that we're launching next year and some other things. So it's more of a tool versus like a big book that we're going to do a fancy launch around. But it's still a lot to do. So a typical day is me on Zoom all dang day. Talking to a variety of people for a variety of reasons. So, everything from the developers that are working on we have 2 different software projects underway. We have, then I'm talking to potential authors. I talk to my team, my leadership team in particular. I have at least one call with each of them every single week. So it is a Zoom day. I don't love that, but we're working on changing that.
Well, and you mentioned a Zoom day, and now, COVID is behind us in a lot of ways. We have people coming into the office. We have people coming into the studio. And I remember early on the Zoom days, because people say, as you get older, time flies. It goes faster and faster. It should be, no. That's all true. But then when you get on Zoom, your life literally flashes before your eyes. I mean, when you sit down and let's say, I don't know, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I don't know when you start, do you sometimes just blink and you're like, where the heck did the day go? It's wild.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild. And so I think we just had a fire truck coming by. They know the podcast is running, so it's just a celebratory fire truck. But for your day, it's more of the book launcher's focus. It's not real estate focus per se. So do you outsource a lot of that now?
My husband deals with a lot of it, like all of the insurance stuff, as far as the the dentist office that we have the problems with, and then we have property managers because all our property's in Canada, so we're not there.
Oh yeah.
So there has to be people that are managing it for us.
That's the one thing I've never understood is I've talked to people when they've got multiple properties, and by multiple, I'm talking anything over like 10. And you kind of assume they have a property manager. They go, no, I do it all myself. I'm like, are you out of your mind? You could not pay me enough money on earth to do all of that. Get the call at 2 a.m. that the toilet's clogged and there's, some arsonist outside trying to light it on fire. I'm like, nope, someone needs to handle that. Yeah. Well, so I'm curious because I know our time is unfortunately coming to a close. And with all of your experience in these multiple companies, as well as investing acumen, what would be the best piece or pieces of advice you could give our capitalizers?
Well, it depends on their age. I mean, if you're young, I would start investing early. Like, putting money aside and then buying property or buying into some investments. You had an episode on in the endowment fund,
Yes, I did. Yes, we did. Thank you for listening.
So you could follow that model. There's lots of things you could do, but age is an advantage. Mm-hmm. So if you're kind of in your 40s or 50s and then you're just going, well, I better start thinking about retirement, you've missed a lot of the advantages of those young years that you had. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing, I mean, I never tell anybody they need to be an entrepreneur because it's not an easy, smooth path. But I do think the missing piece is always action. So if you think there's something more for yourself, just pursue it. Like take a step. Because you'll find out very fast. You'll learn some great lessons, and I think those lessons are always full of gifts that will lead you to a life that is more fulfilling and fun.
Yes. Well, and Julie, we're going to have you back when your other book is out, when your next book is out. But where can capitalizers go to best support and follow you?
Yeah. I mean, hang out with me at booklaunchers.tv. That's my YouTube channel. That's where I hang out. So if you go to anywhere else, my team will answer. But if you go to YouTube, that's me.
That is fantastic. Well, in when does your book come out?
October 3rd.
October 3rd. So by the time this episode comes out, your book will be out. So we're going to have to include it in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on. And to you all that are listening in, that are veterans, welcome back. And to you newbies, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for hopping on the Capitalize bandwagon. If you have any questions about today's episode, you can either give us a call at 253-214-3050, or you can email me directly, Chris, at capitalizeyourfinances.com. We are blowing up a little bit, so I try my best to get back to you within 48 hours. But if I don't, do not shoot the messenger. If you are listening in and you're going, wow, this is a pretty cool show, I would love to come on as a guest. Head on over to capitalizepodcast.com. Shoot us a message. We look at that every single day. And myself or my social media manager, Tyler, behind the screen, will get back to you promptly. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotti, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing. Take care.
Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Julie Broad and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.